When I began this campaign for the presidency about 15 months ago, and it has been 15 months, which means there are babies who have been born and are now walking and talking since we started this campaign. I said I was running because I believed that the size of our challenges had outstripped the capacity of our broken politics to solve, that our politics had become too small at a time when our problems were big. The pettiness, the game playing, the influence peddling that always prevents us from solving problems we face year after year after year after year. And I began running because I believed that this year, that at this moment, it was too important to let that happen again. I had faith that you, the American people, believed the same thing, that you were ready for something different, that you were ready for something new, that you were ready to turn the page and write a new chapter in American history. 15 months later, we're already doing what none of the cynics in Washington thought that we could do. In the face of a politics that tries to divide us and distract us and make this campaign about who's up and who's down and who said what about who, we've built a movement of Americans from every race and every region and party who desperately want change in Washington. That's what's been accomplished over these last 15 months. I have no illusions about how far we have to go. Our road is still long and our climb is still steep. But 15 months after I stood on the steps of the old state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, the building where Abraham Lincoln served before he went to Washington, I also know that our mission is even more urgent because the challenges facing people across Indiana and all across this country are growing by the day. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. You don't have to turn on the news or follow the stock ticker or wait for all the economists and politicians to agree on what is or is not a recession to know that our economy is in serious trouble. You can feel it in your own lives. And I hear it everywhere I go. Like the young man I met in Pennsylvania who had lost his job and was now trying to figure out how he could go on a job search because he couldn't afford to fill up the gas tank. Or the woman from Anderson who had just lost her job, lost her pension, and her insurance when the Delphi plant closed down, even while the top executives walked away with multi-million-dollar bonuses. Or the families across this country who will sit around the kitchen table tonight and wonder whether next week's paycheck will cover next month's bills, who will look at their children without knowing if they'll be able to give them the same chances that somebody gave them. But here's what Washington and Wall Street don't get. This economy doesn't just jeopardize our financial well-being. It offends the most basic values that we have in this country, the values that have made this country what it is. The idea that America is the place where you can make it if you try. That no matter how much money you start with, or where you come from, or who your parents are, opportunity is yours if you're willing to reach for it and willing to work for it. It's the idea that while there are no guarantees in life, you should be able to count on a job that pays the bills, health care when you get sick, a pension for when you retire, an education for your children that will allow them to fulfill their God-given potential. That's who we are as a country. That's the America most of us here know. It's the America our parents and our grandparents grew up knowing. I know it in my own life. This is the country that gave my grandfather a chance to go to college on the GI Bill after he came back from fighting in Patton's army, while my grandmother stayed back looking after my mother and working on a bomber assembly line. Country that gave my grandparents, a small-town couple from Kansas, the chance to buy their first home with a loan from the government. This is the country that made it possible for my mother, a single parent who had to go on food stamps at one point to make sure her children were fed while she was going to school and working At the same time, it allowed her to send my sister and me to the best schools in the world with the help of scholarships. This is the country that allowed my father-in-law, a city worker, a shift worker at a water filtration plant in Chicago, never went to college, gave him a chance to provide for his wife and 2 children on a single salary. Now, this is a man who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 30, was already using walkers by the time he was 40, and yet never missed a day of work, and took pride in the fact that he could make sure he saw his children graduate from one of the finest colleges in the world. And that you have those own stories in your families, every single one of you. And when I think about my father-in-law, when I think about my grandparents, the jobs that they got, they didn't just give them a paycheck. It gave them dignity, gave them self-worth, gave them a sense of community, gave them a sense of meaning and purpose. And they lived in an America that didn't just reward and honor wealth, but also the work and the workers who helped create it. And we are here today looking for an answer to the same question. Where is that America today? Where is that America today? How many veterans come home from this war without the care they need? How many wander the streets of the richest nation on earth without a roof over their heads? How many single parents can't even afford to send their children to the doctor for a regular checkup, or even when they get sick, never mind to 4 years of college? How many workers have suffered the indignity of having to compete with their own children for jobs at the local fast food joint after the rug's been pulled out from under them and the jobs are shipped overseas, and they've lost not only their job but their health care and their pensions at the same time as they've watched the CEO walk away with $1 million golden parachute? How many years? Most of all, how many years, how many decades have we talked and talked and talked about these problems while Washington has done nothing, or tinkered around the edges, or in some cases made them worse? There's no doubt that many of these challenges have to do with fundamental shifts in our economy that began decades ago, changes that have torn down borders and barriers and allowed companies to send jobs to wherever there's a cheap source of labor or an internet connection. And today, with countries like China and India educating their children longer and better, and revolutions in communications and technology, they can send their jobs wherever they want. And I saw the beginning of these changes up close when I moved to the south side of Chicago more than 2 decades ago to help neighborhoods that were devastated when the local steel plant closed. I saw the indignities of joblessness and the hopelessness of lost opportunity. But I also saw that we are not powerless in the face of these challenges. We don't have to sit here and watch our leaders do nothing. I learned we don't have to consign our children to a future of diminished returns, a future of fewer opportunities. We don't have to stand by. We don't have to wait. We don't have to put off solving these challenges, because this is the United States of America. And when we are united, when we come together, black, brown, white, young, old, rich, poor, when we are determined to reach for a better America and to create a better future for our children and our grandchildren, nobody can stop us. And that is why I'm running for President of the United States of America right here and right now. Understand this, Hoosiers. I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from, because politics didn't lead me to working people. Working people led me to politics. For the last 20 years, I've been working to figure out how we can make sure that every single person in this country can achieve their American dream, focusing on their struggles, their hopes, your dreams. I'm running because I don't think we can afford to settle for a Washington where John McCain gets the chance to give us 4 more years of Bush policies that have failed us over the last 8 years. More tax breaks for CEOs who make more in one day than workers make in an entire year. More tax breaks for the same corporations that ship our jobs overseas. More of the trickle-down, you're on your own, can't do, won't do philosophy of governance that says there's nothing that government owes to its citizens. So we might as well just hand out a few tax breaks and tell people to buy their own health care, their own education, build their own roads, their own bridges. That hasn't worked in the past, and it won't work for our future. We can't afford 4 more years of George Bush policies, even if John McCain's the one who's presenting them. We can't afford 4 more years of a no-exit strategy war that should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. We can't afford to have a president who looked back over the last 8 years and concluded that George Bush had made great progress, as John McCain was quoted as saying. I don't know who he was talking to. The 260,000 people who've lost their jobs so far this year. The millions of people who are at threat of losing their homes to foreclosure. The millions of people without health care. The millions of children who, despite the slogans, have been left behind. I know he wasn't talking to them. We can't afford to settle for Washington where our energy policy and our health care policy and our tax policy is sold to the highest bidding lobbyist. We can't keep taking thousands of dollars of their money year after year, election after election, and suggest that somehow we are representing change. Some say these folks represent real Americans. But you and I know who they really represent. They represent oil companies and drug companies and insurance companies who keep us from bringing down the cost of our premiums and our prescriptions and investing in renewable fuels. We can't afford to settle for a Washington where politicians only focus on how to win instead of why we should. Where our politics dictates that we check our polls before we check our principles. Where we calculate before we act on our convictions. That kind of politics may get politicians elected, but it doesn't get America where we need to go. It doesn't change anything. We have always been at our best. Our party, the Democratic Party, when we've summoned an entire nation to lead not by polls, but by principles, not by calculation, but by conviction. When we say to the entire nation, we are calling you to a higher purpose, a common purpose. And that's the party that America needs us to be right now. And that's the choice that confronts the voters in Indiana and North Carolina on Tuesday. That's the kind of politics that will actually bring about change that we can believe in. You know, the debate we're having in Indiana this week is a perfect example. For 30 years, through Republican and Democratic administrations, Washington didn't do anything about the energy crisis. They knuckled under to the power of corporate lobbyists and refused to raise fuel efficiency standards on cars, refused to invest in alternative energy, refused to do the things that we know we have to do to meet this challenge. So instead of reducing our dependence on oil, we saw it grow and grow and grow to the point where we send hundreds of millions of dollars every single day to hostile nations to pay for our addiction. And that's the big part of why you are paying $4 a gallon at the pump. And now, the answer that we're getting from some is a temporary summer gas tax holiday, the same proposal that John McCain made. Well, people do need help. They desperately need help. And that's why, after 4 months of straight job loss, my stimulus package includes another round of rebates to put a little more money in the pockets of everyday Americans to help cope with the impact of rising costs. That's why I want to reform our tax system and eliminate corporate loopholes to pay for a middle-class tax cut that will give the average family $1,000 of extra money to spend or to save. But a gas tax holiday? This is an idea that will save you altogether 30 cents a day for 3 months or $28. That's if the oil companies don't simply jack up their prices to fill the gap, as they've done when it's been tried before. Does anybody here really trust the oil companies to give you the savings instead of pocketing the money themselves? It is a shell game, literally. But I make this point because we have to ask ourselves, what do we stand for? What kind of party are we? Are we a party of expediency? Are we a party of just getting by? Getting to the next election? Because unfortunately, that's how Washington too often works. It offers empty gestures calculated to get politicians through the next election instead of real solutions to get our country and our people through the toughest challenges. Now, I wish I could stand here and tell you that we could fix our energy problems with a holiday. I wish I could tell you that we could take a time out from trade and bring back the jobs that have gone overseas. I wish I could promise that on day one of my presidency, I could pass every plan and every proposal that I've outlined in this campaign. But my guess is that you would have heard that before. You hear them every year in every election. And afterwards, everyone goes back to Washington, and the game playing and the influence peddling and the petty bickering continues. Nothing gets done. And 4 years later, we're right back here making the very same promises about the very same problems. Indiana, this year we have a choice. If you want to take another chance on the same kind of politics we've come to know in Washington, there are other candidates to choose from. But I still believe we need to fundamentally change Washington if we want to change America. I believe that this election is bigger than me or John McCain or Hillary Clinton. I think it's bigger than Democrats versus Republicans. I think it's about who we are as Americans. It's about whether this country at this moment will continue to stand by while a few prosper at the expense of the hardworking many, or whether we're going to stand up and reclaim that American dream that my grandparents had, that my father-in-law had. Reclaim that American dream for every American. Now, reclaiming that dream will take more than one election. It will take more than one person. It'll even take more than one party. It'll take effort and sacrifice of a nation that's united. And that's the truth. But if we do it, then I'm absolutely convinced that nothing can stop us. We can provide relief that's more than a holiday to families that are struggling in this economy. And that's why I'm the only candidate who proposed a genuine middle-class tax cut that would save not just every family who's working hard, of middle income, $1,000 on their tax bill, but would also allow senior citizens who makes $50,000 a year or less not to pay income tax on their Social Security because they need relief. They need help right now. That would help homeowners who are struggling to stay in their homes, the kind of relief that they need right now. That's why I'm absolutely convinced that this is the election where we can start putting in place the kind of universal health care system that we've been talking about since Harry Truman. I've got a plan that says if you've got health insurance, we're going to lower your premiums by $2,500 per family per year. And if you don't have health insurance, we're going to give you health insurance that is at least as good as the health care I have as a member of Congress, and we will not exclude for pre-existing conditions. And we will emphasize prevention, so we have a health care system instead of a disease care system. And we won't wait 20 years from now to do it or 10 years from now to do it. We can do it by the end of my first term as President of the United States of America. And to pay for that, we're going to have to roll back the Bush tax cuts on the top 2%. And they can afford it. I can afford it. Because the fact of the matter is, we didn't need it and weren't even asking for it. And the notion that John McCain is offering more of the same at a time when he fought those same tax breaks, said they offended his conscience when they first came up. Apparently his conscience got waylaid on the course of the Republican nomination. The wheels came off the Straight Talk Express, but we're here to provide some straight talk. That's what this campaign needs. That's what America needs right now. That's why I'm running for President of the United States of America. We may not be able to bring back all the jobs that we've lost to trade, but we can create tomorrow's jobs in this country. I happen to believe in free trade, but we do the cause of trade no favors when we pass agreements that are filled with perks for special interests and absolutely no protections for American workers. There's absolutely no reason that we should be giving tax breaks to corporations that ship jobs overseas. And when I'm president, I will eliminate those tax breaks. I will make sure that every single one of our trade agreements has labor standards and environmental standards that our workers can count on and believe in. They will actually be enforced, and we will have safety standards so our children aren't chewing on toys with lead paint on them. That is a guarantee, because trade has to work not just for Wall Street, but for Main Street. That's one of the reasons I'm fighting in this race for the presidency of the United States of America. We can create 2 million new jobs if we finally get serious about rebuilding our crumbling and decaying national infrastructure. Not just roads and bridges, but laying broadband lines to stitch together this entire country and to stitch Indiana together so that everybody has access to this new global economy. And if people tell you that we can't pay for it, then you just remind them that we are spending $10 billion a month in Iraq. Iraq just doubled its income because of rising oil prices. They can start paying a bigger share, and we can start putting some of that money to work right here in Indiana. We can start putting some of that money to work right here in the United States of America. If we want to take a permanent holiday from our oil addiction, we can finally get serious about energy independence and create 5 million new green jobs in the process. Jobs that will pay well and cannot be outsourced. Now, I think the Democratic candidates happily have proposals to create green jobs, but part of what's going to be required is telling the American people the truth, that there's going to be some costs to setting up a green economy. We're going to have to do what I did when I went to Detroit and told the automakers that they're going to have to raise fuel efficiency standards on cars. We can make more efficient cars right here in the United States. There's no way that they have to be made in Japan. But it requires that Detroit changes its ways. And I have to say that when I delivered that speech, nobody clapped. The room was really quiet. But that's okay, because that's part of what is the task of the next president. We can make companies pay for the pollution they release into the air. Well, we can tax the record profits of the oil companies, and we can use that money to invest in clean and affordable and renewable energy like solar power and wind power and biofuels. And if we want our children to succeed in this global economy, if we want them to be able to compete with children in Beijing and Bangalore, then we need to make sure that every child, everywhere, gets a world-class education from the day they are born till the day they graduate college. And that means investing in early childhood education to close the achievement gap. It means we need to recruit an army of new teachers and not just talk about how great teachers are, but reward them for their greatness by giving them higher salaries and giving them more support. And we need the highest standards for our kids. We need the highest standards for our kids, but we can't measure high standards just by a single high-stakes standardized test. Because I don't want my teachers teaching to the test. I want teachers who are teaching what they love, teaching subjects that will instill a passion for learning in our children. I want them learning art and music and science and literature, and the President of the United States should help teachers do their job in the classroom instead of trying to punish them. And it means that in this country, in this global economy, we will not create a small class of the educated few by allowing thousands of young people to be priced out of college year after year. We're better than that. That's why, as president, I'm going to make a bargain with the young people of America that says we're going to provide a $4,000 tuition credit every student every year, but you're going to have to give something back. You're going to have to work in a homeless shelter, spend some time in a veterans home, join the Peace Corps, join the Foreign Service. We'll invest in you, you invest in America. Together, this country can march forward. That's a bargain that the young people of America are ready to participate in. But we've got to have some leadership in the White House to do it. And finally, if we're going to be honest with the American people, then we can start putting our foreign policy back on the right track. You know, my job as Commander-in-Chief will be to keep you safe, and I will not hesitate to do what's required. I won't hesitate to strike against those who do us harm. But in order to keep you safe, we've got to maintain the finest military in the world, and that means training our troops properly and equipping them properly. It means putting them on proper rotations, and it means that we are treating them properly when they come home. No more homeless veterans, no more begging for disability payments, no more driving for hours in order to get to a VA center. We are better than that. And it means using our military wisely. The war in Iraq was unwise. That's why I opposed it in 2002. That's why I will bring it to an end in 2009 and 2010. It is time to bring our troops home, start focusing on al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, which we should have been doing in the first place. That's the kind of clear break and straight thinking that we need from the President of the United States of America. Real relief for middle-class families, seniors, and homeowners. Lower premiums for those who have health care and coverage for everyone who wants it. 5 million green jobs right here in America. A world-class education that will allow every American to reach their God-given potential and compete in this global economy. All of this is possible, but it's just a list of policies until you decide that it's time to make Washington work, to make Washington look like the America that we know, one where the future is not determined by those with money and influence, where common sense and honesty are cherished values, where we are stronger when it comes to what we have in common than that which divides us, because in the end we rise and fall as one nation and one people. That's what this election's about. And for all the contests that have been taking place during the course of this primary, and I know that some have felt dispirited about the length of this primary, I am absolutely convinced that Senator Clinton and I share the same values as you do, that we are interested in moving this country forward, and we know in our hearts what the Democratic Party should be about. The question is whether we shed our cynicism and our fear and our doubt, and we reach for what we know is possible. It won't be easy. We've always known that this wouldn't be easy. Change in America is never easy. It happens in fits and starts. And that's the only way that a black guy born in Hawaii named Barack Obama can win this race. That's the only reason I'm standing here today. If you decide that you've had enough with the way things are, if you decide that this election is bigger than flag pins or sniper fire or the comments of a former pastor, bigger than the differences between what we look like or where we come from, or even what party ultimately we belong to. See, I will never forget that the only reason I'm standing here is because somebody, somewhere, stood up for me. Stood up for me when it was risky. Stood up for me when it was hard. Stood up for me when it wasn't popular. And because that somebody stood up, a few more stood up, and then a few thousand stood up, and then a few million stood up, and standing up with courage and conviction and clear purpose, they somehow managed to change the world. Now is our turn to follow in the footsteps of all those generations who sacrificed for us and faced down impossible odds to perfect this improbable union. And if we're willing to do what they did, if we're willing to shed our cynicism and our doubts and our fears, if we're willing to believe in what's possible again, then we won't just win here in Indiana, we will win this nomination, we will win this general election, and you and I together, Indiana, we will change this country and we will change the world. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you. Thank you.